I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with composer Daniel Hart, who composed the beautiful music on Interview with the Vampire. Daniel, I read that showrunner Roland Jones has called this gothic romance an aggressive, toxic, beautiful love story. Is that how he pitched the show to you when you first signed on?
He didn't use those words exactly, but definitely a gothic love story. And I think he assumed that I would know enough about Interview with the Vampire already because of its place in culture.
Yeah.
And I do. So he didn't really need to pitch me on anything. Also, anything that Roland Jones does, I will happily say yes to forever. So yeah, he doesn't have to pitch me. It doesn't matter what it is. If Roland's involved, I'm there.
We'll just do it. If he's like, we're going to do a show about the phone book, you're like, I'm all over that.
I can't wait.
What is it about him? What do you most admire and love about working with him?
Roland, he's a brilliant writer. He is a playwright. He comes from the theater world. And my degree, in university, I didn't study music. I studied playwriting. That's my degree. And so there's something about that camaraderie between playwrights, I think, that makes me feel like I'm talking to my brother or something. And then beyond that, his love of and deep knowledge of classical music, and especially modern, experimental, and contemporary classical music, is, in my limited experience anyway, unparalleled. Wow. In the TV world. He knows more about music than most other people that I've met in any world, actually. But music is really important to him, and he knows enough about music to be able to speak in musical terms. And that's a real gift.
Yeah. What a pleasure. And I mean, that just, from what I know about your work, that sounds like such a great collaboration, the two of you together, creating something really special. No wonder that it's come out so beautifully. Elliot Goldenthal's score that he was nominated for an Oscar for is so iconic, I think. Stylistically, you both employ, a beautiful, epic classical sound, but I felt like you brought so much more to your adaptation. It's really opulent, it's really majestic. What typically do you do when you're about to embark on a highly, regarded project that has been adapted before, but you need to make it your own? Like, to me, that sounds like a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure. I tried not to think about any of those things. That's what I did. I didn't go rewatch the movie from the 90s. I didn't go back and listen to Elliot's score, which is incredible. I just, when Roland and I started talking about this first season of Interview with the Vampire, we did talk a lot about music. We talked about different kinds of music. He referenced a lot of pieces to me. We talked about classical music from the early 20th century. We talked about Florence Price. We talked about Florence Price. We talked about Aaron Copland. We talked about William Grant Still, Duke Ellington. We do have a lot of conversations about music, and that does inform where I go, stylistically speaking. But I think more than anything, I'm just waiting until they start sending me scenes or episodes. Because no matter what I think ahead of time, everything changes when, or not necessarily changes, but everything is made clear once I can actually see what's happening on screen. That's where all the clues are. That's how the puzzle gets solved. It tells me what kind of music, what kind of instrumentation, how fast the music should be, how emotional, how melancholy, happy, tragic. Once I see what's happening on screen.
Let's think of an example. In what ways does the show's really rich visual palette, and then of course Sam and Jacob's like lightning in a bottle chemistry on screen influence some of the choices that you made on the score throughout your process?
There's a theme. There's a theme that I would call their love theme, and it's sprinkled throughout the first episode, but it played in full over the end credits in a piece called "In Throes of Increasing Wonder," and that theme appears in almost every episode, I think, throughout the season in some form or another. And that theme I don't think it was possible before I had seen some of that interaction between Jacob and Sam as Lestat and Louis. It's born of their emotional reactions to each other. And so once that melody showed up in my head, and I started with piano, and once I started finding it on the piano and finding the right chord structure to go with that melody, I started thinking about the ways in which to best express it with an orchestra, because we knew pretty much from the beginning of the season that we would have an orchestra available for at least some of the music when needed, because there's some more intimate scenes that didn't really require a full orchestra for the score. But I knew we would have an orchestra. So then I started thinking about orchestral arrangements for that particular theme. And I think seeing Louis and Lestat have their first kiss in the first episode was the first place where I was like, oh, this is going to be really something quite powerful between them, this melody. And we put it in the strings, because strings are the most romantic, evocative part of the orchestra for a melody like that.
Yeah, and a Daniel Hart piece with some beautiful strings, like that's what I'm hoping for. That really recognizable, like I thought it was like a leitmotif or a theme is filtered throughout the score, and I love it. It's like a coupling. It's like this yearning, melancholy and romantic. It's so recognizable now as part of his show. I hope that you continue using it throughout, your next season. I don't know if you're working on it yet. Are you actually working on season 2 yet?
Well, season 2 is being filmed right now.
Yeah.
Like season 1, there is some on-camera music happening in season 2, and so I did have to write that before they could film it. But the majority of my work for season 2 won't start until they're done filming, so later in the year. So in terms of themes like that love theme, I haven't started working on that side of the scoring yet for season 2, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how much that will make an appearance in season 2, because it's really Louis and Lestat's theme. I feel like Louis and Armand need something different.
Yeah, that's right. So you won't try to adapt that love theme. That's for Lestat and Louis. We may not even hear it then. We'll see. I don't know when they're going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Who knows?
Who knows, right? It's all a big secret for now, even though some people might have read the books. Let's do a little bit of a deep dive. As soon as you press play on the soundtrack, and which, by the way, I've listened to repeatedly for the last few weeks in my noise cancelling Sonys, and it's a real experience. I honestly, Overture is this urgent, grandiose theme with string elements, of course, that marry rousing high notes with muscular baritone notes. It's really the perfect way to start the show. And then it lingers over this uplifting piano melody, which I wasn't really expecting. What's going through your mind when you decide to give us something that is so unexpected and takes turns like that?
What's going through my mind? Roland asked me to write an overture for the show. He wanted it to be done in that way, like an old film would have, or like an old musical would have. But because it's television, we don't have quite as long as you would for maybe, like West Side Story has an overture, and I think the West Side Story overture is about 5 minutes long.
Yeah.
That's sort of expected if you're going to see a musical, that the orchestra would play an opening number that would cover all the themes that would be introduced throughout the rest of the musical.
Mm.
But in television, there just isn't that long to have before scenes need to start happening. So
Yeah.
the overture is about 90 seconds long. So I tried to be as efficient as possible and to think about what were the most important themes to introduce there at the beginning that would make appearances throughout the show. And at that point also, because this was relatively early on in the scoring process, we didn't even have all the themes yet. So when I wrote the overture, I hadn't written Claudia's theme yet, for example. So it couldn't be incorporated into the overture. But I took what felt to me like the 4 most important themes. There's the thing that starts it is sort of comes from it plays when Lestat is turning Louis, and then that goes into Come to Me, and then that goes into this love theme that we're talking about. So I tried to pick the things that felt like the most important parts of the arc for the story that I knew up to that point when I wrote it.
Yeah.
In the season.
And there's a lot in there that I didn't even realize it's 90 seconds. To me, it feels so much longer. It's very immersive.
Good.
Yeah, good tick. So another track that I really enjoyed is like something like Vienne à Moi, which has these really compelling staccato or agitato violin arrangements that you're really known for. One of the things you're known for. And then this unrelenting like cello melody. It's so good. And can you take us through the thought process on a track like that?
Yes. This again came from Rollin wanting something with that kind of pulse in it.
Yeah.
For that scene to carry over what's essentially a montage. I mean, it's a montage with dialogue interlaced, but essentially a montage. And I am a violinist. That's my training. So that's where I'm going first a lot of the time when I'm thinking about instruments that would suit what was needed for the scene. And violins are very good at an ostinato part. And I don't know why the cello for the melody just felt right based on what I was seeing in the scene. I can't remember if I tried any other instruments for that melody first. I don't think I did. Yeah, I felt like mostly needed to stay in the strings for whatever reason. But I did rework it a couple times. Like the first section always stayed the same, but as we got further on into the scene, when Louis goes to the brothel to try and find Lily, I did have to rework sections because what I had originally written ended up being too busy for what was happening there and all the dialogue that needed to be heard and conveyed to move the story forward. So I had to rework that and pull back. And then at the very end of that piece of music, when we get into the confessional booth, Louis is there at the church confessing his sins. I again had written something much more involved, and then Rollins said, no, we need it much less. And so then I pulled almost everything out, and then that was too little. So then we started adding things back in until we found that right balance.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, there's just something about the cello and the violin that really evoke emotion. It's like it approximates the human voice, or it's organic, it's tight, it's plucked. I don't know, but I just always really seem to respond to it. And then, of course, you've got some really awesome horror elements in there too, which is good. We want some of that as well. A great example being Permanent Exile, with a MIDI deep bass sound, ascending, tightening overlay. It reminded me of like some of the greats, like for example, like Wojciech Kilar's Bram Stoker's Dracula, for example. And that's when I really get into the genre side of things, and I get really kind of nerdy and nerd out on the vampire story. So is that fun to do the horror stuff, to kind of pivot a little bit into that horror?
It's so much fun to do it. To do it like that, right? Like I'm never gonna be hired to do a Saw movie or Paranormal Activity, because that's just not it's not where I came from. It's not the thing that excites me musically. That kind of horror, I just don't. It's not in here, you know. But this kind of older horror score. Bram Stoker's Dracula is one of the first scores that I ever cared about.
Me too.
Yeah. One of the first, when I watched it as a kid, where I was aware that there was music happening and that it was doing something for me. And I listened to that soundtrack quite a bit. And in fact, I did listen to it before starting work on season 1. Wow. So it wouldn't surprise me if some stuff that I wrote felt like Kilar, because he was in there anyway.
Yeah.
From my childhood, but I did a refresher course on him. Yeah, that piece was so much fun to write and so much fun to record with the orchestra, because it involves a lot of extended technique, especially for the brass, like stuff slightly outside of the traditional classical realm.
Yeah.
And when they get to do, you know, fun stuff, it's fun to listen to, fun to watch. I think it's fun for them. They seem to enjoy.
It would be so great to be in that in that room with the orchestra. And you're in Vienna, right? I think that's where you were.
We recorded the orchestra in Vienna.
Yeah.
I was not there.
No.
I was at those orchestra sessions remotely.
Yeah.
Because we were working on season 1 as we were recording the orchestra, like recording the orchestra for the first 3 episodes while writing the music for episodes 4 and 5. So no time to fly back and forth.
Yeah, that's multitasking at its best. Then I mean, I could literally just talk about every track, but we'll move on before we run out of time. Episode 6 though does feature Come to Me, that it's getting so much buzz on social media. People love that. Obviously that's the song that Lestat wrote for Louis, and Sam sings it on the soundtrack, which is cool. So was that always part of the plan to write an original song, or did it emerge later on during the process?
No, that was in there from the beginning. Roland told me from the beginning that we would need that. And I did write at least one version before this one that was rejected, maybe two versions before we got to the thing that we were looking for. And I'm so happy with how it turned out, and so thrilled with Sam singing. He doesn't necessarily think of himself as a singer, you know, an actor first. He's an actor first who likes to sing. That's how he thinks of himself, at least in the conversations that we've had. And so his performance is really quite, it's impressive anyway, but more impressive that he wasn't 100% sure of himself going into it, because I feel like he really knocked it out of the park. And then beyond that, just I'm so thrilled that the fans of the show really like it too. Yeah, couldn't have gone better.
You could not have asked for better than that. Daniel, congratulations on a really, really beautiful score, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much, Robert. It's a pleasure to talk to you.